Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of History After Hours. My name is Kevin Pumphrey, and my co-host today is Ron Franklin as usual. And we are going to be discussing all sorts of topics. It's Valentine's Day, everyone. So for some reason, we forgot to mention Valentine's Day. Crazy. We're going to have to talk about that probably on the next podcast, just because we need to. Anyhow, this is Season 3, I think Episode 16, and obviously February 14th, if you want to know, 2018. And on this podcast, we talk about a little bit of everything. We kind of winged it today, so we talked a little bit about immigration, kind of what's the deal with immigration and globalization. We talked a little bit about the evils, or maybe the good part of capitalism. We talked a little bit about the misunderstanding of socialism. And we ended the podcast with a new segment we're going to call Folks You Should Know. These are historical figures that you might not know about. They're not super famous, but there are people that they changed the world, or at least the country, or something. They had an influence. So we're going to start maybe bringing up one person, or we each pick one. Today we picked two people, and we'll talk about that. So that is the podcast. Hope you enjoy. Just a reminder, you can find us on Twitter, SoundCloud, Facebook, YouTube at History After Hours. Please make sure to subscribe, and also join us live. If you want to see us do this live, you can join us at Collective Coffee on March 1st. So, there you go. Goodbye. So let's begin talking about Collective Coffee. So
all right, yeah.
That was a cool experience.
Yeah, we had a good time there. We had a good crowd turnout. Those guys are awesome. So we'll end up going back down there again.
Yeah, I think the temporary plan is the first Thursday of every month.
Yeah, something like that, right?
I think so. March 1st is the next Thursday that we'll go down there. And if you're wondering why you're hearing this podcast and you haven't seen the other one, I posted something about it, but we had some audio problems. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we'll get those all corrected, because those folks were real nice to let us use their facility to play music in and talk about whatever. And I think the next one, we might just have a Ask Us Anything podcast where let the students just kind of ask us.
Let it roll out, yeah.
So if you
see
have
where
questions.
It goes.
Also, make sure that you submit questions. We have History After Hours on Twitter and whatnot, and we've had some, and we had another one. Oh, it was about net neutrality and what the effect of that is. I think we mentioned that before.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit.
Have we seen any impact from net neutrality?
I don't think yet. You mean the ending?
Yeah, the ending of it and what it might do.
Yeah,
I know there's what it could do, but
I think the potential scary is maybe worse than. I don't even know how long it might take for something like that to take place. Basically, the idea is that with by ending net neutrality, that you're ending consumer protections, and anytime you allow corporations to sort of, they say, well, trust us. Well, I don't know. We've seen that in the past, right? Corporations aren't necessarily trustworthy. They are when it comes to their bottom line, though. If this turns into a situation where we have more variety of choices and we have better quality of services, that would be fantastic if that's what this actually does. That's the concept, I suppose, behind getting rid of the restrictions on them. But at the same time, the dangers of having a mass communication thing like the internet that's not being controlled by the FCC, or at least some sort of oversight. Like, I don't know, it's worrisome, but I don't know that anything, just being worried doesn't mean anything bad's going to happen. Right. So we'll see. I mean,
as polarized as our country is right now, especially political party wise, there is one thing that the Democrats and Republicans have always shared, at least in the last 20, 30 years. They both get in bed with these corporations and receive millions in donations and money and lobbyists and all that. And I think until we fix that, I mean, we have now a corporate president, really.
Right.
Until we fix that, whether it's campaign finance or some regulations or getting rid of Citizens United, it's going to be tough to make any major changes with the way things are, I mean, in my opinion. But, we live in strange times.
It depends on point of view, I suppose. There are people who celebrate the fact that we've got corporate President Trump. In spite of the show that he puts on a daily basis, seemingly, He's actually, opened avenues up for more success. The tax break thing for corporations is seemingly having a positive impact on people's lives already. There are corporations who are given bonuses and pay raises and things like that. Reinvesting in the country's companies, which then is a reinvestment in the country itself. So, I mean, maybe if that sort of thing continues, and we can see them using some sort of, ethical guideline to, keep from. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy, and I think some people forget that. This country was founded by elitists for elitists, honestly, to be able to enjoy what they had. That's where the whole, pursuit of happiness part comes in. Yeah. We had stuff, we wanted to be able to enjoy it without, being impugned. So there's nothing wrong with that. But when you do that by taking advantage of the workers, or you're not giving back to the system, or you're not really reinvesting in your own people or the country, that to me is problematic. Then you're just milking the system for your own gain. And it's like I've used this analogy in class. It's like a dragon sitting on a hoard of wealth. You're not going to share that, and you viciously attack anybody who might approach it. That's the part that unrestricted capitalism bothers me. Yeah. If it gets to that point, right, it could be that.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism's it's a big part of why our country is what it is. The American culture influence on the whole world. I mean, we talk about Sam Walton and making Walmart just this giant corporation. I mean, that in and of itself promoted capitalism in corporate America around the world, and people wanted to model that. This is where you get China starting to go away from their communist, type mindset to a more quasi-capitalist, because they realized that was how they were going to become a giant. And they are now, of course. And so, there's benefits.
Well, I enjoy being a consumer, right?
Oh, yeah.
I like the variety of products that we have. I like and I know some countries look at us and they go, well, you're so gluttonous. Yeah, I think that's a byproduct of prosperity. Yep. And but I like consumerism. I don't like consumerism that props itself up on backbreaking work for people who are working in a slave-like scenario in any kind of factory system or whatever. Right. So how do we balance that out? That's really the key, right? And we've exported those ideals out to other places mainly.
And this brings up a point of like the success Bernie Sanders had in the election, the campaign, is he was saying a lot of things that kind of populist ideas like Trump did, kind of, we're going to help, we need to help the working class. But what people don't realize is, and I know you have students too that we, the school we're at, we do have a lot of liberal students, more than most in Arkansas, I would say. And a lot of our liberal students love socialism or think that's the way of the future. Because, it's more equal. We're going to bring everybody up. And of course, we talk about this thing. But if you challenge a super left-wing liberal about this and you go, you want equality? Do you really want equality? Or are you just saying that? And if they go, no, I really do. The thing is, like, if you're really egalitarianism, if you're really for equality across the board, we should take all of our money in America and give it to third world countries. Because 95% of the people in America are wealthier than most people in the world. Mm-hmm. So, when you say, hey, yeah, I'm all for, spreading the wealth.
To what extent do you really mean that that's true, right? So,
yeah, I don't know. Technically, we don't have enough wealth in the world.
Would you be willing to give up part of your benefits as an American with access to all of these things for someone else that you don't know in another country? I don't know too many people who would actually honestly believe that that's true. Now, what if you could do both, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's one of the beautiful things about capitalism, too, is that we can expand what we have and what we do to the point where you can still share and bring other people up without diminishing the haves very, or at least very minusculely. And we've seen that. We talked about that on the wrap-up show for 2017, the idea that global poverty rates are on the decline, that more people have food security, that there's more rights and privileges. Like, those things are actually coming true. It's slow, and we're actually having this conversation right now in my Euro class, because we're talking about the 1800s and the idea that, socialism is trying to get its head together. What is it going to be? Is it going to be this radical version of it? Some people like Marx are saying we have to have violent revolution. Other people other socialists are seeing some progress there. We're seeing that through democratic process in multiple countries. We're seeing workers' wages increase, and we're seeing benefits. Germany's going to instill the first pension plan. So
I'm talking about
things are happening, right?
Early 20th century progressivism. I'm talking about that in American history. Eugene V. Debs and the Socialist Party was gaining, in the Wobblies, they call them, industrial workers of the world, a labor union party. And, he's a guy who got 6% of the vote a socialist, the first real socialist we had in American history, 6% of the vote in the presidential election, I think against Teddy Roosevelt, or maybe Taft. But he ended up in jail. But, nobody's perfect.
So,
but
like I said, if you do it right, you can benefit more people. And I think that when people who criticize capitalism are criticizing the massive excess on top of the crushing poverty that it can generate, because we have to have raw materials and we have to have workforce.
Right.
How do you treat that workforce to gain more profits? That's really the kind of the key, right? It always kind of has been, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's, we have challenged, I know we challenge conservatives constantly, especially when they embrace Trump and Trumpism, because we're pretty critical of him. But, liberals today and left-wing in general, specifically left-wing, I hate to use the word liberal, because liberalism...
When you say that, it almost makes it sound, and I'm not pointing at you, but I mean, when people say that, it's like they are equating that with the radical fringe elements of the left.
Wingers.
That doesn't, there's a whole spectrum of people who consider themselves liberals who are not fanaticals,
right?
Or fanatics, or lunatic fringe types, right? Isn't that a Roosevelt term? Didn't Roosevelt coin that term, lunatic fringe?
Yeah.
Anyway, so
maybe.
So we have to be cognizant of the fact that to say you're liberal, like, what does that mean? Are you a social liberal? Are you economic liberal? Are you, there's all kinds of different ways to be that. Are you just thinking about civil rights in general? You might be that person who believes that more people need the right to vote or enfranchisement, but you might not be willing to have a ton of social programs to get there. There might be other processes. I don't know. So.
I try to avoid now using liberalism and conservatism because of the meanings are so crazy.
The root word of liberalism is liberty, which talks about personal liberties. The idea that, again, if you go back into the 1800s, the industrialists were the first liberalists.
Well,
they were the first liberals because they wanted to be able to own businesses that they wanted, to run them the way they wanted to pay people what they wanted to earn as much profits as they wanted to.
You can't regulate me. I do what I want.
Yeah, laissez-faire. Leave me alone. Those are liberals. And so we've kind of lost that track because you start thinking about people who are demanding the tearing down capitalism to create more wealth for more people or to share the wealth. Like, that's not really what that means. Ultimately, that's a different interpretation or a different level of that particular idea. So
I'm constantly trying to challenge my students on anything they say, and so to do that, I have to really think about issues like globalization that we have seen in the past 100 years, and specifically speeding up with the internet and all that, is an issue, and people want to know about immigration. And I hear a lot of my students, well, we should have just open borders. Okay, well, if we're going to talk about open borders, there's only two things really that can happen. If we have open borders, let's just say we let people come and go as they please. Number one, if the government's not really in charge of that, then you're going to have all sorts of people coming in. You could have a flood of the market. It's going to impact your economy. You could have terrorists come in. You could have great people come in, but we have to be able to monitor that. Or some sort of global government that monitors all that, if you're going to have open borders across the board. And we don't really want that either. This is why a lot of people celebrate Brexit as actually a success, because, the European Union did a lot of good things, and immediately you think of their currency and some things. But a lot of people were saying, this is hurting our culture. It's watering down, Brexit. We do want, our own thing. So it's such a hard issue to really nail down.
Globalism, in a sense, erases nationalism, and that can be problematic. So again, where's the balance in that?
Well, Marx himself said he wanted workers should have no borders.
Right.
Like workers should be. It's a global. He wanted eventually a global revolution. Really.
Right.
So, and that's Marx. It's a socialist. So it's such a complicated issue. And what I said in the last podcast that didn't get uploaded was my least favorite thing about politics, and specifically about people's politics, is that if you tell me your stance on gun control, I can guess the rest of them.
Yeah.
Because we don't have independent thinking. We don't take case-by-case basis. If you are a person that's listening to this and you can hold two opposing viewpoints in your head at the same time, you're above average.
Bravo.
In my opinion. Yeah, thank goodness. See both sides.
Yeah, well, so for the other side, it's true as well, right? So I know people who lean left who think that all conservatives are, ultra nationalists and racist and this and that. And that's not true either. Like, people don't understand the spectrum of the design and how you can actually be, just like you just said, I can be both things. I can be a liberal and a conservative at the same time.
Right.
depending on what
The
the
issue.
topic is, depending on how I think that something needs to be handled most appropriately, then I can take it one side or the other, and I do. That's part of the beauty of being an independent, and I'm not stuck to a party ideology that's going to push towards the poles, right? And I don't mean like voting poles. I mean like towards the polar ends of the spectrum. You don't have to be. People can calm down and actually have rational discussions about stuff they disagree on, and that is where progress happens, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see if we take this seeming madness that we've got going on between the different aspects of our society and find a way forward. But cooler heads have to prevail. That's the idea. Moderates will rule eventually.
Yeah, and I think I'll tell you one thing that frustrates me is Republicans right now frustrate me because of these tax cuts. Because I'm all for tax cuts. I love tax cuts. Good. Take less money because you don't do very good with the money you take from me. Mm-hmm. I'm for that. However, I'm also really scared of this national debt thing. That keeps creeping up. And I think right now, for the first time in history, it's $1 trillion a year, it looks like, projected.
Wow.
Because once again, we have this massive tax cut, which means the government makes less money, yet we have not cut spending.
And we've increased spending.
And that's what we always do. We're going to increase spending.
Right.
If you don't want a national debt, then you need to constantly be either increasing taxes or increasing some revenue. And the big lie that has been told to the American people for 40, 50 years now is that, oh, well, the tax cuts will help our economy in the end. It'll trickle down. It'll create investment opportunities, which could be partially true, but it just does not seem to outweigh the spending.
Well, it's like the way that communism promised equality, and that never worked because it's logistically so complicated to try to make that happen with mass distribution and all that. So the same way that didn't work out, the same thing is true about this promise of trickle down. It doesn't really help out like they say it's going to. It never has shown to be. Now, in theory, could it work? Yeah. Same thing the way communism and socialism, true, the way that Marx saw it, the way that could work. But again, as an ideology, it fits really well there because in practice, it doesn't quite pan out that way, right? So the same thing with this. Every time it's promised, oh, we're going to help this and this. I'll give you a prime example. My paycheck went up, $1.50 based on the tax cuts?
Yeah.
And people say, well, you got to celebrate that. You got more money in your pocket. Thanks, Trump. And thanks, Republican Congress. Well, you know what? $1.50 will buy me something, I suppose. But it's not the same thing, and I cannot ever equate it in my mind as the same thing as billions of dollars for corporations that they're gifted with this. Is it really going to truly turn into something more for middle class and lower class people in the form of wages and more products and more services? I don't know. We'll see. That's the promise. We'll see if it turns out true.
It's kind of
this
like
time.
buying an automobile that you can afford, or no, I'm going to buy this really, really expensive one, but it's more efficient. And so in the long run, and then it breaks down. Is the federal government the only institution that constantly lives beyond its means? Like, we can't do that. If we lived beyond our means, we bought a house we couldn't afford, a car we can't afford, eventually somebody's going to come take it away from us. We'll get bad credit. We won't be able to make our payments. We'll get punished in some way.
Yeah, nobody's investing in me, though.
That's true.
Like, they're getting investments, too. It's not just taxes, so how else are they raising their money? But I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's such a I'm not an economist, so I don't know. But I can tell you this, neither's Trump. And every time he says, I'm a good businessman, so I know the economy, I'm just like, okay.
You got to cringe a little bit.
Yeah, because economy is one of those things. Yeah, if figure out the perfect economic system, make you $1 billion. That's because it's an imperfect science. It's a scientific field that is definitely, who's the last person to make a huge, advancement in economics? Like, I mean, I think of Adam Smith and capitalism, kind of the whole free market idea.
Yeah.
You think of, what's his name? John Maynard Keynes.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Because I don't study that enough thoroughly. I don't know who the last.
And there's some genius out there that can
is.
Go country by country and figure out the perfect economic system for them that would help the most number of people.
Yeah, that'd be nice to see.
Yeah.
Why not? Let's do it.
I agree.
Not you and I, because I don't know what I'm doing. I know how to form opinions on what I'm seeing that's happening that other people are doing. But as far as
that's our job.
As far as the complexity of that, like that's sort of mind-numbingly interesting to me, though. I couldn't do it. It's like astrophysics. I don't know how to do that.
I like to hear about it.
I like to hear it, but I don't get it.
Yeah, okay. That's me. I'm interested in a lot of stuff, but I don't have the
science of economics.
The science of economics. That could be the next big scientific achievement.
Mm-hmm.
If you can figure, and by the way, we've got a whole new wrinkle coming with the mechanization. You showed me those robots.
Yeah.
Dude,
They
we're making our replacements.
Was it Boston Dynamics? Who was that? I don't remember.
It said
who that was.
Boston Dynamics.
Yeah, so they've been working on multifaceted robotics for a while. Some of it's militarized, some of it's not. But they showed one I guess yesterday I showed you this. It's a robot that it looks like a dog. It's shaped about like that, but it has a neck that extends, and what would be the face, quote unquote face, actually has a hand, and it can see what it's doing. It can grab doorknobs and open things up. And yeah, so in this little video they showed, like, one was helping another one escape a lab. That's kind of weird, if that's where this is going.
I wonder like when this starts to be militarized and robots will be used, for hand-to-hand combat, or in just, policing. You just have robots walking down the street policing.
Well, we're not that far away from drones.
Do you think they'll be human-like, or because our bodies are not the most optimal?
No, probably not.
For those robots you showed me that look kind of like small dogs, where they can raise up and grab stuff and then go back down. And
they can run a lot faster that way too, right? These robots can run.
Yeah, somebody said that they think it's going to end up being like tracks, like a tank track kind of, but with leg options. Like they'll be able to do both. Like it's rolling like a train, and then when it needs to, it can take steps and can jump. And some of those things can do flips and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. We're going to see it though. It's coming.
It's coming. Yeah.
Let's leave with this. This is something I threw on you early, so I'll throw you a quick one.
All right.
What is a historical figure that most people listening to this don't know, but they should know because they're cool or interesting or influential? I've got one real quick.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
You start thinking of your world history, European,
okay,
whatever. And I thought of this because I'm teaching at Upton Sinclair. There's a guy that most people don't know, and he wrote a book called The Jungle, which talked about how unsanitary, when we first started getting cows and shipping them all over with railroads, they would go to these slaughterhouses and there's no sinks, just rats running everywhere. Horrible environment. And so he went in there to actually look at working conditions, but he ended up being petrified by how gross everything was. And so he wrote this book, The Jungle. And this one single book really made America, and Teddy Roosevelt was the president, I think it was 1906, it made everybody aware of the unsanitary conditions in this place, which eventually led pretty quickly to the Food and Drug Act, which eventually will lead to the government agency we like to call the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. So that's a very influential thing. Matter of fact, I have something called the 100 Books in History. It might be in the top 100 books ever written. So there's somebody, Upton Sinclair.
Along the same line, and I'll stick with American history too. There's a guy, and this was introduced to me a long time ago, a guy named Jacob Riis, who was a reporter in New York, who's going to be one of the first photojournalists. And he writes a series of exposés on the impoverished immigrants in and around New York City, and he goes to the different boroughs, and he sees who's living and how they're living, and he starts taking photographs with their permission and publishing those in the newspapers, and eventually it was compiled into a book. But as far as a social crusader and a guy who's made it his life's mission to use the new technology, especially photography was relatively new.
Oh yeah.
This is in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and for him to go through and then to write what the conditions were. The book's called the book was called How the Other Half Lives, and people were stunned by that because a lot of people didn't realize what the working poor or the truly impoverished immigrants who were coming in the country were really facing.
Yeah. If you were rich or middle class, you didn't live in the cities like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you did live in the city, you would be living in a place of you didn't experience.
You didn't go to places like this, and you don't realize.
Jacob Riis, interesting enough, started to do meetings where he would bring in these people and show these photographs over a projector.
Yeah.
And a lot of those pictures were made possible by a brand new invention called the flash on a camera.
Right, because some of these places were dark. Yeah, that's right.
And he wanted to take pictures at night because that's when most people came out with crime. It's also people were sleeping on the streets. Also, that's when the husbands were home, so you have ththese tenements where everybody's crammed into one apartment. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to show how horrible it was, and nighttime pictures made that a little better.
Yeah. And it got a lot of people's attention, like these mutual aid societies that we see popping up. A lot of them were going to spend more time trying to help the people and a lot of orphans, right?
Yep.
His work does a tremendous amount to, I don't know, would you consider him a muckraker?
He was a muckraker, yeah. I mean, he's exposing these problems, and he, half of American society or more they're Marie Antoinette. They're let them eat cake. They don't know what's going on, although that's false, I know. But like they didn't understand.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't necessarily their fault. I think that sometimes people
Right.
get a bad rep, especially the more affluent people in whatever country. They'll take some hits from people who say, "Well, why don't you do more? Or why don't you seem to care?" Maybe they don't know. That is a possibility.
Oh yeah,
Out of sight, out of mind. It's not part of my working reality. I don't know, and so it takes work to illustrate the conditions, and then to find people who will, because that spark of humanity is in most everyone, I assume, unless you got some sort of a psychological condition, and people will want to reach out, and that's exactly what happened here. Wealthy people, or just more affluent people in general, took it upon themselves to try to find ways to ally their forces to try to help people, and so that's what it takes.
Two muckrakers, Progressive era, early 1900s, late 1800s, Jacob Riis, Upton Sinclair, two people you might not know. So we're going to wrap this up, but I think that should be a new segment. So every podcast, we're going to think of one person that you might not have been taught in school that you should know. And
I like it. The new segment.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to call this? Like, who's that?
Yeah.
We need to come up with a snazzy name for it. We'll take suggestions too.
Yeah. I was telling my class today real quick that I want to start a new class just called Stuff You Should Know. And like literally, because we've been talking about what kids need to know as they graduate and stuff. They really should. I mean, life skills.
Folks you should know. You should know?
Yeah, maybe. Folks you should know.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Well, that's us signing off. And make sure to join us at Collective Coffee if you want to see us do this live on March 1st. And we will see you later.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone.